Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Game of Thrones is, well, Game of Thrones. If you don't know what it is by now, honestly, where have you been? It's been on telly for ages, years. It's been nearly 10 years. Anyway, we're here at the battle that's been hinted at since the very, very first scene of the very, very first episode of Game of Thrones. Because the Night King's army of the undead and like all his ice guys are finally going to descend on the living. And as ever, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and follow me on Twitter at Grumpy Opinions. So let's go. Episode 3, The Long Night, or maybe better called The Battle of Winterfell, picks up again at Winterfell, and everyone their auntie's just waiting to get into the fight. But before it starts, Melisandre, the Red Priestess, comes, and then she does like fire magic on the Dothraki swords, and then she like goes into the castle and tells Davos that he doesn't need to bother executing her because he said he was going to do that, because she says she's going to be dead before the dawn breaks anyway. And then she gives like Arya a really hard look, which totally won't be important later. Anyway, someone must have said the pub's open because for absolutely no reason the Dothraki go like screaming off into the dark, and then they end up like getting their asses kicked. And after that, it's big fight proper time. And it starts going really badly, so to hell with like the plan, so Dany and Jon just go Bernie with the dragons, and that kind of helps out a bit, and then they go after the walkers themselves, since taking them out will like knock out most of the undead, video game logic. But the bad guys use like a big magical storm, and then they're all over the place, so that's the dragons out. And back at Winterfell, it's like a full retreat back to the castle, so like the Unsullied end up holding them back and like sacrificing themselves, and then Old Mel does like a fire trick on the trench, and that gives them like a few minutes to hold back the bads and catch their breath, and meanwhile Bran's like, dum-da-dum. Anyway, it's short-lived because like the undead make like body bridges over the fire, and then it's full-on siege time, and like the hordes are like climbing up the walls, and it's not long before they're actually inside, and the proverbial like is hitting the proverbial, you know what I mean? Anyway, Dolorous Ed gets dead, which is a shame, and Sam looks upset and runs away, and then the battle's raging, and Bran's like, tum-to-tum. Anyway, it's crazy time, and Arya does some moves, and she gets chased inside the castle, and Beric and the Hound go chasing after her to help, and she ends up in the library. She stealths it up, but as soon as she's out of there, it's chasey bad time. And then the old boys end up helping her, and Beric gets stabbed real nasty, and they get to safety, but that's him gone for good. Night night, buddy. But Old Mel is like, there's a reason for this, that's why, you killed so many people, even some that have like blue eyes, hint, hint, hint. Nah, not subtle at all. Anyway, it won't be important later. And outside, it's getting really bad because they've got a cave troll. They've got a giant, and wee Lyanna Mormont goes up and like she gets smacked hard, but then the giant like lifts her up and gives her a bit of a crunch and squeeze, but then boom, she eye stabs him. Ah well, shame, but she went out like a champ. Meanwhile, Jon and Dany get like the Night King off of his dragon, and Jon like gets downed as well, and then Dany has a go, but she finds out that Dragonfire doesn't do anything against like the King of all evil coldness. So that Jon goes chasing after him, and it's almost going to be mano a mano time, but then the old icy guy does like a resurrect and brings up a whole battalion of dead good guys to like fight on his side, and of course the side effect of that means that all the corpses down in the crypt come to life, so all the people who've been hiding there in a safe place find themselves in a bit of a slaughterhouse, and Tyrion and Sansa kind of like make up about all the bad things that happened when they were married. Oh aye. Anyway, Dany's now like down on another dragon since it flew off covered in deadites, and like Jorah comes to give her a hand, and they're fighting off the new horde, and Jon starts making his way to the Godswood, like ignoring everyone else, and only ends up fighting up against an undead dragon. I'm not sure which one this is now, but anyway, yeah. Meanwhile, the Bad King and his dudes are actually in the wood, and they've killed almost all of Bran's dudes. So Bran tells like Theon, he's a good guy, and thanks for all the help. And then Theon does like a suicide charge on the Night's King, and it goes about as well as you'd expect. And it's all looking really, really grim, as you might expect. And Bran, and he looks like he's going to get dead, but then suddenly, boom, out of nowhere, Arya comes flying in with a ninja jump on the king, and then cacks it, or so we think. But no, she's going to like do a Rey from Star Wars, and she gut stabs him, ending the undead army forever. But it's too late for Jorah because he got stabbed bad, and Dany has like at least one dragon left. And just as the dawn's about to break, true to her word, Old Mel walks off into the ice, drops her magic immortality necklace, and then she dies in the snow. Wow. So what did I think? Well, holy heck, this was like a big battle of an episode, and I'm totally amazed they managed to keep it going for like 80 minutes of a full siege and then battle. And what's more, they actually managed to have incredible visuals, and it really felt like the undead hordes were like thronging in their thousands all over the place. And I love the fact that, they paced it quite well, because, Arya had the wee stealth section, which was nice. It was like a wee island of quiet and the spooky horror right in the middle of the battle, because otherwise it was just all going to be like swords and zombies and stuff. And it's nice to be reminded that like Arya can do like all this sneaky stuff. Obviously, that ends up being like important later on, sort of. And the deaths, they actually felt quite meaningful as well. I mean, I'm surprised there were so few, but as I predicted, we still did lose Lyanna, Beric, and Theon. I mean, I was right for those dudes, even though I thought there was going to be a lot more people who actually died. I mean, Melisandre died, but I mean, I didn't even know she was going to be here because she suddenly just turned up out of the blue. And Dolorous Ed died as well. But yeah, but I really liked actually that Lyanna, the way she died, because that was a total like wee homage back to like the Odyssey by Homer. The whole stabbing the one-eyed giant in the eye. Anyway, that was a nice little literary reference. I liked that. And I actually thought the good guys did pretty well, especially like the whole bit inside the castle, and then they came back out, and there wasn't actually that many undead left, so things were actually going okay, and it saw that it wasn't just a totally one-sided battle, so they carried the day. And I loved that like the Night's King was like, guys, I can just keep doing this all day, and like brings back all of the dudes. And then Arya's like final leap out of like somewhere, and her wee knife switch. I mean that was cool. It was really cool. But here's the thing, it was cool. It didn't entirely make sense though, and it didn't entirely fit. Now, as I said, I enjoyed a lot of the episode, but some of it felt kind of a bit thin. I mean, the internet is pretty much full of people doing videos about this episode and why this work or doesn't work. I mean, honestly, it's like almost as bad as like when The Last Jedi came out. I mean, literally everyone's split on this so badly. But for my money, I thought this was kind of messy. I mean, particularly as a battle episode. Now, here's the thing. We've had big sieges and massive battles in movies for years. I mean, basically since the dawn of cinema. But especially in the last like 20, 30 years, I mean, we've had absolutely loads of them. I mean, you go right back to stuff like, Spartacus, but then you've more recently had stuff like Gladiator and Kingdom of Heaven, or you've stuff on TV like Game of Thrones, and they've had loads of like, great battles on Game of Thrones. I mean, this one felt like kind of all things, like the Battle of Helm's Deep. Only it wasn't as good as the Battle of Helm's Deep, because, it was a little bit confused and muddly. Now, I'm not like a tactics general or anything like that, but even I can see that some of that kind of side of it didn't make much sense. And that's a major thing if you're trying to make like a battle. Because, if you're trying to film a battle, you want people to understand what's going on and you want things to actually work out in a way that the audience can understand why they're doing things and why they work or don't. But I've absolutely no idea when I watched this. Like, why did the Dothraki charge out in the darkness? Genuinely, if somebody ordered them to go, I didn't really notice that. So it looked like they just rode off just for shits and giggles as soon as they had their burning swords. Now, even with those burning swords, they didn't actually do a lot, and they were shooting like a load of those like cannonballs from the catapults, and they was lighting up the area in front of them. But why didn't they do that beforehand? Why didn't they have like burning fires out in the distance? I mean, I thought that was normally a thing. I'm sure I've seen that in other films where people like light little pitch fires like at distances so that they know how far the archers have to fire. And these guys knew that they were going to get attacked like, long enough to build like a defensive wall or like of like a trench with like all the little sticks in it all the way around the whole of the castle. So do you think they would have at least gone out and stuck a couple of things down to like mark distances and stuff? In fact, you hardly see a single archer at all firing a shot during the entire thing, up until the gods would. And then when you see those guys are so amazingly like they're basically like Hawkeye from the Avengers. They can just hit anything, and that baffled me because you think they'd be firing like loads and loads of arrows to make get the bad guys before they got close, like just like happened in the Battle of the Bastards, or like when the Wildlings were attacking the wall. They used their archers. But anyway, like I said, tons of videos online that are covering this from people who know way more about that kind of thing than I do. And there's loads of articles and stuff about it. So yeah, I mean, I can only speak for me. But there's loads of little odd things that didn't make an awful lot of sense. Moving into other things, I mean, the basics of filmmaking. I mean, a lot of people have been complaining that it's kind of dark, but I watched it in a dark room and I thought it was pretty acceptable. I mean, there was a little hint of like, the same problems that there were with that Solo movie where it looked really like they'd filmed it all dark and brown and murky. And similarly, there was an awful lot of like fog effects and smoke and snow, and it made some of it a little difficult and a little unpleasant to watch sometimes. But as to editing, I mean, a lot of the time it seemed to just be folk like hacking at bads, and then it would cut away. Now, if you look at a good battle, then it shows you what's happening, and at the start it makes sense. I mean, look at something like a wee short battle, like the beginning of Gladiator. I mean, then you knew exactly what was going on because it was two armies facing each other, and then they clashed. And it's fine that it's a mess once they clash because they basically fought until one side won. I mean, that was just a tiny wee thing. You look at that as something like Outlaw King, for example, they really went to town to show why, they dug trenches and the bogs and the effect that had, and why the cavalry couldn't go around the outsides and flank them and stuff. And that made it make sense when you're watching it. Or like a really complicated thing like the big battle in Alexander, where they literally have a scene where like Big Al explains the tactics beforehand, and then you understand when you actually see it why bits of it work and why bits of it don't. In this episode, I mean, they had the scene last week that explained it, but after that, like that, it wasn't really enough to really understand what the tactics of the actual battle were. You knew a couple of ideas of things, but in this one, I mean, you got those shots of like the Dothraki riding across, and and that looked cool and everything. But then as soon as like the enemy had reached the wall and breached it, then it wasn't really clear what was happening and who was going on, and sometimes you weren't even sure where people were because it was just close-ups of like characters fighting with some smoke and fire around them. Now that's not great. I mean, because if you think about it, Helm's Deep did all this exact same thing much, much better than it did it 15 years ago. And you always knew what was going on because they had establishing shots and they had like big wide shots and aerial shots and stuff, so you knew what was going on. And this is a big show. They've got a lot of money. But it also doesn't help that while I actually liked like things like how Arya delivered that final blow at the end. That was confusing because 2 minutes before that she was in like a room that it looked like that was a dead end or something. And then she suddenly like ran off past the camera to somewhere. And it was like, oh wait, you could leave through that way? I didn't know that. And then she ends up suddenly up in the Godswood somewhere. I mean, maybe she was up a tree, maybe she Assassin's Creed it like Theo across the battlements and then on a tree or something. But I mean, it didn't really entirely make sense. And like John, during that bit at the end, that was, it made sense, but it was really unsatisfying because he basically literally spends the last couple of minutes of the episode playing hide and seek with a big dragon. And instead of actually trying to attack at the end, he just like yells it. I mean, he's got, a big Valyrian steel sword of like undead slaying. And surely if he'd hit that, then he would have killed it. But instead, he just kind of sits and screams like, is he trying to do a Dune or something? It was strange, it was weird, it was unsatisfying. If he looked like he was actually about to like hit it or something, that would have been fine, great, but he didn't. And there was other little things, just like little silly niggly things, like I mean, the bit where they were under the crypt, like Miss Andy's that whole bit about.
Without the Dragon Queen, there'd be no problem at all. We'd all be dead already.
Yeah, nice sentiment, love, but you couldn't actually know any of that because you've been in the crypt, and as far as you know, the dragons aren't being used yet. So Dany hasn't actually done anything yet about the undead. All she's done is lost a dragon to them. So yeah, it's not like these people would be alive because Tyrion was never there, and neither was Sansa. So that line just stuck out as very much TV writing that didn't actually make sense. Also, in a big wider universe thing, the whole dragon glass Valyrian steel thing just confuses me at this point because they've never really explained it. I mean, how's it work? I assumed that what it meant is like because Valyrian steel's use dragon fire to make it, and dragon glass is using dragon fire, that it was like it undid the magic somehow and made the undead just the snow guys turn back into ice, and it turned like the undead just into corpses again. So do you actually need to kill people or do you just need to cut them? Because if that's the case, then they should have been using way more arrows because all you would need to actually do is score a single arrow hit on like one of the walkers or on the Night's King, and then massive amounts or the whole of the evil like undead army would have gone down. But it felt a little bit like it was just it does whatever we need it to do to make the episode work, which is always a bad way to write things. And even then in the books, you've only ever seen like the undead like being hacked apart with like Valyrian and steel swords, and you've only ever seen like a walker stabbed with dragon glass. But it made me wonder, like, if maybe Theon had like drawn a dragon glass dagger and like cut like the Night King's ankle as he walked past, then that would have worked. And I literally thought that in that scene, maybe he's going to do something like that, but he didn't. And of course, then 2 seconds later, Arya drops down and does that thing with a knife, and which kind of lessened the effect of that because I'd literally just been thinking during all those close-ups of Theon, maybe he's going to do something and suddenly pull out a knife and stab him in the foot, like Merry and Pippin style from Return of the King. Anyway, overall, I enjoyed the episode, but it's kind of a far cry from the high points of the show. And as a season finale, I mean, well, it's not the finale, but it's the final season. But as a massive battle that's tying up all the undead and the Night's King, it was a little bit underwhelming, despite like the clear production value. But yeah, anyway, next time it looks like we've got another setup episode coming. And I expect that much like the first couple of episodes this season is going to be a lot of regrouping, a lot of talking, a lot of people arguing, sitting around, a lot of eating, a lot of planning. And then that only gives 2 episodes after that. So yeah, like I said, I reckon it'll be set up, and I reckon like the big finale will probably actually be a cliffhanger between episodes 5 and 6, not like a whole war or battle or anything. But I think there'll be like that'll be the final episode. But I expect they'll do a lot of big stuff in those last two. So next week is probably going to be the big like deep breath before the plunge. So until then, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.